Hi, we're here with Matthew Gallizzi, and he's a founder at HX Works. He's a business consultant and confidant who creates new possibilities through conversation and technology. And what he's going to cover today is how your language habits impact you and your business. And what you're going to learn is understand the purpose of language and how it serves you, notice how language impacts confidence and mindset, and get specific language that can serve your happiness and success. Really excited to have you, Matthew.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya. I'm grateful to be here to share with your community, and also grateful to serve alongside you for the past couple of years, not always in a coach capacity, but just to see this vision evolve and whatnot. So it's been a fun journey, and I'm grateful to be here. Why don't I start off with a story of a time in my previous company that, Tanya, you may have heard this before, but it was a time at previous company that was June 13th, 2013. And I was on a nightly walk, as I did at that point in time, to de-stress from the day and to reflect on the day and what things I was up to. And I remember on that evening, it was around 9:30, because I remember hearing the fireworks from Disneyland in Orange County as I was walking, and it was June 13th, 2013. So we're going into the summer. It was a dry wind, a warm wind in the evening. And I remember walking around, and I came to the conclusion that I had built a business and a life that was no longer life-giving for me. I felt burned out. I was 10 years into my tech company at the time. And I just remember not being happy with what I was doing. And it was the first time I had really had that thought. And from there, I remember going on a journey for a few months and figuring out who is Matthew and what does Matthew want. And I wanted to share this backstory because it lends itself to my fascination with language and where a lot of this was born. Prior to my tech company, had a video production company for a couple of years. Prior to that, as a kid, I had a car washing business for 4 summers, the good 9-year-old kid story for entrepreneurs. So I've spent a lot of time working, and some might say I have good work ethic, and it was fun. It was fun what I did, but I got to a point where I just became tired of what I was doing. So January 1st, 2014, I started HX Works, and HX stands for the human experience, HX Works. And I think of my evolution across these different companies as being someone who works in the business, which is often the case with the technician, right? The person who's in the business. And then I moved to working on the business, got a team with some early projects, and was building systems and whatnot, much of what we have here in Owners Up. And then the last 5 years or so has been a deliberate time of working on myself. And I've been fascinated with how working on myself plays into working on the business and working in the business, and it affects who I am in those roles. So at HX Works, like you said, I'm a tech consultant, largely focused in technology, automation, chatbots, narrow AI, and some web dashboards for companies to manage specific parts of their company. One fun project I worked on was when you call Pizza Hut, it says this call may be recorded for quality assurance. So I consulted on the dashboard that management uses to download those phone calls. So that was a fun project on the tech front. And then as a confidant, through conversation, I'm working with somebody to listen and to hear what they're going through as they're running their company. And I often hear things that are not shared with employees or business partners or significant others for obvious reasons. But I remember one scenario where the CEO I was working with in the Bay Area, he had a newborn son, and he felt guilty going home early from work to be with his newborn son, but he wanted to be with his newborn son. So he shared that with me, and early for him meant going home at 6 p.m. To be with his newborn son. So he had a medical tech company, and they had human trials in other countries, and they were busy. He didn't want to leave his team. So we talked through that. And as a confidant, I'm really honoring what's true for people and where they're at. And a lot of that is through language. Language is the thread in all of this that I'm really fascinated with. Now, to avoid burnout in my current company, what I'm doing is I have, as you know, I travel full time. Everything I own fits in the trunk of my car. I have a mountain bike. And I've designed things that way. I wanted to build something that is life-giving for me, and it's all deliberately created. And one of the threads in all of this has been my fascination with language and how language affects what I'm able to create. And it's been a fun journey of learning to create with my language. So having said that, I see language as a tool, as a powerful tool that we use to create. And I think that everything or most of what we have is directly correlated to our ability to use language. And to clarify that, I'm not so much talking about beliefs or even mindset for that matter, or positive or negative thinking or gratitude. I'm not getting into that. Those are subsets of language. Those are things that happen within language. I'm talking about language as a whole. So I see language as a tool, and I know for me what it's done is it's allowed me to really fundamentally change who I am in my company, with my team, in relationships. It's really changed a lot for me, and I'd invite whoever's watching this to pay attention to this webinar, to this talk, to this conversation you and I are having, and see what you can learn. See what you can learn. I invite whoever's watching this to open your mind to seeing the world differently. I invite you to open yourself up to thinking about things you may have not thought about before. Most people listen for right or wrong, for agreement or disagreement. So if I say something, someone might think to themselves, oh, that's right. That's a accurate statement. That's true to what I believe. Or, oh yes, I read about that somewhere. I read about that concept somewhere. I'd invite whoever's watching to listen for insight, listen for distinctions that I make, for ways that I see my world that might serve someone as they're creating their world and their business and the life that they want to lead. When I think of language, I think of it as the thing behind all things, and really fascinating. So why don't I jump into the purpose of language, and we get into it. So what is language? When I know I'm using this word a lot, language, but what is language? What are we talking about here? I mentioned language for me, I think of it as a tool that we can use, that we speak in, that we think in, to communicate with one another. And at a macro level, we have different groups of people that communicate in different languages in different parts of the world. And for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to specifically talk about the English language and what that looks like here. So if we're going to unpack this idea of language a little bit more, I think of language in terms of the characters that we assemble into words that create sentences and phrases that create the stories and meaning that we live with, that dictate the quality of our lives. And I think of language at that level. And then if we're stepping back a little more for some fun, I think of language as the sound that comes out of our mouth, and we live within the context of the sound that we speak, this language that we speak. We see the world and we create the world via our language. To unpack this concept a little more and how language serves different purposes in different environments, I want to share a few different examples of where language shows up. We have language in the gym, for example. So if you can imagine somebody in the gym who's exercising, they're doing some stretches, and they're with a personal trainer. Language in that context is helping somebody to connect with their body and the way that they're moving so that they don't hurt themselves, so that they do things in a proper fashion. And language in that context might also be used to help motivate someone, to push someone beyond what they thought was possible. And I know this concept, Tanya, is close to home for you because you've done a lot of work in the gym and as a runner and whatnot. So that's one environment. There's also language in the hospital. So in the hospital, different environment where language shows up, where a doctor might work with the patient and share with them what's happening in their body. And someone can choose to listen what's going on for them, and they can choose to get better, and they can honor language in that environment. There's also language in politics, which is often about the way someone believes the way the world should work. And there's a lot of agreement or disagreement listening for that in politics. That's often what happens there. But there's also language in music. So I saw a Scandinavian jazz vocalist up in Wine County a few months ago, and she was singing with language, and it was a means of self-expression. It was a way to share story, to sing other songs that other vocalists have sang. And she also was scatting in jazz, so she was able to create some rhythm with language, and wasn't so much language as it was noises. But there's also poetry, language and poetry. It's a different type of self-expression, different type of wordplay, or philosophy, the intellectual pursuit of ideas. And there's language in business and organizations. There's language in business and organizations in that language helps to keep the business cohesive. It helps to bring everyone together under a common set of communication language and ways to reaffirm a company's values and vision so that it can serve its intended purpose. There's also language of self, the way that we speak to ourselves, and there's that language and how that shows up in our life. And all of this, underneath it all, again, is language. And I share these different environments because when we know the purpose that language serves in these different environments, whether it's business or in the gym or in the hospital, we can honor language in that environment. We can understand how to listen better. For example, if we have, let's say, someone named Louie, who entrepreneur, runs a company, has a team, and they value freedom, and they don't like being told what to do. If they're in the hospital environment and they're not listening to the doctor because that's their natural state, they don't like to listen to other people, they're not honoring language in that context. And sometimes that can get in someone's way. When we know the environments of language, we can honor language in that environment. When I think of language, if we're thinking of it more like an analogy, I think of language like the chef thinks of ingredients that they're cooking with. If they want to create a certain entree or a certain dessert, they're going to use certain ingredients to create what they want. Musician with musical notes can play music that gets people to dance, or can play a piano melody to get somebody to feel a certain calmness, if you will. Or the painter who uses language like paint, or maybe it's a programmer that uses code to serve its intended purpose that they're writing with code. Language does this for all of us. The world that we see is the world that we live in. And that concept may resonate with people differently. Some people may think that's something that they've heard, that's an obvious idea. The trick for me, and the fun that I have with this, is keeping that awareness top of mind at all times, in moments of frustration, of anger, in difficult times, maybe in low moments, and really understanding that I'm creating the moments that I live in with language. When I think at that level and I look at things at that level, to become happier and more successful, or to have a more confidence in what I do, it doesn't come about changing certain beliefs. It becomes about changing the way that I see my world by evolving my language. And that can take courage. It can take courage to look around and see things differently than other people might normally see them. So we look around and we understand that we make sense of the world via our language. But moving along with the impact of language, language impacts how we feel, it impacts how we live, it impacts how we relate to one another, it impacts how we exist, whether it's through communicating with one another or certain ways of doing certain things. Language is at the base of everything. So in summary with this section, I think I've talked about language enough here and what language does and what it means to me. But in short, in summary, we wake up one day and we look around us and we form characters that were given to us by society or guardians. And we create words that create sentences, that create stories and meanings that dictate the quality of our lives and our businesses. And if we want to increase the quality of our life or our business, we have to evolve our language. We have to change our language. And I'd also say that I don't believe in any specific idea of reality, or I don't believe in like, this is reality. I just believe that there's 7 billion different people on the planet that see reality in different ways, and there's 7 billion different versions of reality. Every person sees the world in their own way. And that for me is really fun. It's my deepest freedom. I get to play at that level and play with how I see things. It's a personal space that's fun. So moving along in terms of how language impacts confidence and mindset, let's jump into that. I have a story here that was about 10-year-old Matthew in fifth grade, elementary school. So after fifth grade, we were moving into to middle school. So sixth grade, eighth grade was middle school. And our class was celebrating our graduation. And we didn't do caps and gowns in elementary school like some schools do now. We were going to a water park, and the whole class went to a water park. And I remember standing in front of my elementary school waving at the bus of all of my class going to this water park. I didn't go to the water park because I was embarrassed about my farmer's tan. And I can laugh at this now. But 10-year-old Matthew, that was very true for me. And where I'm going with that is language definitely impacts confidence. It impacts how we feel. And I think that language, it's like the strings on a puppet that a marionettist uses to control a marionette, a puppet with strings. I see language in that way. Language is what we use to identify our behaviors and our habits. And when we do that, we can then change it. Whatever was true for me then, I've learned to see a certain world that doesn't have me feeling what I felt then. I see things differently now. But that theme of feeling that discomfort, and then after the school bus left, I went to the cafeteria to help and to work and just to support what was happening there. That theme of pushing down uncomfortable feelings and just working, it's manifested for several years throughout my life until I stopped and slowed down and worked on my language and worked on evolving my language. So having said that, language definitely impacts confidence, and I'll share how mindset plays into that too. But before I continue, I want to change the word confidence and mindset. I want to use, instead of confidence, let's think of it in terms of how we feel when we're confident. So Tanya, when you're confident and you know you're confident, how do you feel? What's the sensation you feel in your body? I know you're...
Yeah, I guess like take charge, assured.
You feel assured? I could, okay. For me, when I think of confidence, for me, I feel a certain sense of calmness and a certain sense of presence. And I think it looks differently for different people. I don't want to say confidence looks one way. But for me, it feels like a certain calmness in my body, or I speak from a different place when I feel confident. And when I know that feeling that I normally feel when I'm confident, I can then create that. I can self-regulate and create that feeling and create that confidence. But that starts with the feeling. With the word mindset, let's use a different word there. So instead of thinking of mindset in the way that the mind is set, which is a stagnant word, which is not true. We know we can change our minds. Let's think of it as the way that we see a situation. So instead of talking about confidence and mindset, we're now talking about the way that we feel when we're confident, and then we're talking about the way that we see things. So then it just becomes an equation of understanding how we want to feel and changing the way that we see things to get that feeling, to get us what we want. So that can look like evolving our language. That can look like giving different descriptions to how we feel, the sensations in our body. And all that comes to just evolving our language when I think of that. When we don't feel confident, we often think of, we often use other words like lack of self-confidence or low self-esteem or what have you. And sometimes a lot of these words can indicate just certain sensations or feelings that we have. So I would invite who's watching to ask yourself, how do you want to feel? And then ask yourself and take pause of what you see in these different experiences wherever you may not feel confident. Wherever you may not feel confident. I know I didn't feel confident in my business talking about numbers for a long time. And I remembered one call I was with at a friend next to me, and I was quoting a project. And I remember viscerally feeling my body sink as I started talking about the numbers of this project. And I asked him after the call, hey, did you feel that in me when I started talking about numbers? And that was related to the way that I saw money. That was related to my relationship with money and the language specifically that I was using to describe what money means to me and what money does for me. So wherever you're not feeling the way that you want to feel, I'd invite you to ask how you're seeing that situation and understand how you're seeing that situation affects what you're feeling. So one example as a question, and I think this is the single greatest takeaway that I can bring to this time, is asking this question, and asking this question with all language, with the way that you see things. And the question is, what do you get from using language the way that you're using it? What do you get from seeing the world the way that you see it? What does that do for you? What is your payoff? What is the benefit to you from using language the way that you're using it? For me, that single question is enough. I can probably stop this webinar here, and that can keep somebody busy for weeks, months, maybe even years. That's not only a question for the person that's speaking and the person that's thinking with language, but it's a question for somebody else. When I ask myself that question, what does this person get from that? I might ask myself that if I'm in reflection mode, or I might ask that if I hear someone else say something. And that allows me to listen to people differently, because I'm no longer listening for right or wrong or agreement or disagreement. I'm listening for what's true with somebody, and I'm listening for what they might get out of sharing something with me. And maybe they're hinting at it, maybe their intentions not being made clear. But for example, in an owner's up call, if someone's sharing how they really need to be in sales mode, I can read into that in different ways. I can just brush it off and, oh, this person says that they need to be in sales mode. Yeah, of course. Or I can read that as, oh, this person might be getting into a difficult spot financially, and we need to talk about the runway and how much sales mode, because that's going to affect the strategies that we get into. So there's different ways of listening to people and asking the question, what do we get from that? And then that can also inform what other people might get from their language. So as a couple examples, that can be anything from unpacking certain values and what values someone might get from their values. So for example, I value freedom. I think my life and my travel and whatnot reflects that. But one of the questions I asked myself at some point was, well, what do I get from valuing freedom? What does freedom do for me? Well, at some point in my life, I maybe didn't feel free. I maybe didn't feel free to express myself because maybe I was a shy kid, or maybe I was insecure and didn't feel like I could speak up, or I didn't feel safe, or whatever the reason is. At some point I asked myself, well, how am I not already free? Or maybe I am already free, and thus the intensity of freedom that I need goes away a little bit, because I get clear on what that looks like, and I unpack it with, what do I get from this? What do I get from this language? How is that serving me in terms of getting to what I want? And I say getting to what I want in that asking myself where I'm going, so that I am not just doing things based off what I think I should be doing, but I want to feel more calm in my business. I don't want to feel anxious and depressed and just crazy off the rails. I want to feel a certain sense of grounding and a certain sense of calmness. So when I ask myself, what's my payoff? What do I get from this? What's my benefit with my language or the way that I'm seeing things? I'm able to take that answer. And if it aligns to what I want, I'm able to move in that direction. Or if it doesn't, I'm able to change the way I see things or use different language to get what I want. Another example, small example, but just to show you the different ways that this question can be asked is, let's say I get a text message from a friend that says they can't do lunch tomorrow, or a business relationship. I can respond and say, okay, I'll see you next week. Or I can respond and say, no worries, all good. I'll see you next week. So when I ask myself, what do I get from my language? And I ask myself, what do I get from saying, no worries, all good? Well, I'm reinforcing my need for harmony with people, or my value of harmony with people. And the more I'm aware of that, the more I can see who I'm being and how I'm communicating and the intentions that are coming across. And that's a small example, but that question of what does someone get from seeing things this way? What's the payoff? What's the benefit? That can be asked of what we speak. That can be asked of the different types of things that we think. That can be asked of our business partners, our employees, our teammates, our clients, and it can help tune us into listening to people differently in terms of what's true for them and what they want. So having said that, I think that's all I have on the topic of confidence and mindset. In summary here, the way to think of this that I suggest is not thinking of confidence as this abstract thing, but as a feeling in your body. And when you're confident, ask yourself, what does that look like? How do you feel confident? What situations do you feel confident? And what's the feeling in your body? And then when you know that, to focus on that, to create more of that, and to choose to see situations differently by asking the question, what do you get from that? What's your payoff? What's your benefit? And changing the way that you see moments, changing your language to get you more of that feeling. So that's that for that section. We're getting close to 30 minutes here, but my last section was to get specific language that can serve you and your happiness. I do have a handful of things that I can share, but I think the question that I've already posed, which is, what are you getting from that? I think that's enough to keep someone busy for a few months. However, my invitation to you, if you're watching this, is to take the next 24 hours and listen and reflect and ask this question. What do you get from that? What do you get from your language? What do you get from the way that you're seeing things? What's your payoff? What's your benefit? That could be of yourself or somebody else. And in 24 hours from this recording, email me and let me know what that is. And if someone's interested, I can record a voice note and share some more specific language that you can use, specific examples. But I think that question by itself is enough for now. Should I share my email, Tanya, or does that get included with the description or what have you when this gets sent out?
Yeah, you can share that. We'll put the...
Okay. Sure, okay. So email me, Matt, M-A-T-T, at hxworks.com. So Matt at H is in human, X is in X-ray, works, W-O-R-K-S.com. And let me know what you've learned. Let me know what you noticed about asking yourself the question, what do you get from that? And then from there, I can share a voice note on more specific language if that's of interest. And one small distinction here I'll close on is that question, what do you get from that? I want you to notice that what do you get from that stays in the present. It's not asking yourself a why question. Why did you do that? Why did you do that often can take us into the past. And when I lived in the past and was stuck in the past with the same stories, I often asked myself a lot of why questions, and I did not understand this distinction. So asking what do you get from that questions keeps you in the future or in the present. Asking why questions keep you in the past, which don't always serve the process of personal growth. So what do you get from that can keep you in the present. But having said that, I think that concludes my 30 minutes here. And I don't know if you have any questions, Tanya, but we can dive into that, or any more practical things I can jump into, or actionable steps that could serve the community.
So one question would probably be, if somebody's in the mindset of kind of what they're worried about their business, how, using this technique, are you informing them to shift to be in abundance? So if they're in scarcity, how would you have them shift to abundance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that scarcity thinking can control so much. I remember I was talking with a friend once about if we had $20 million, what would we do, right? That question. And I remember going back and forth on which car I would buy. And it was, one for the mountains, one for like long distances or what have you. And I remember him saying, well, why don't you just buy both of them? You have $20 million in this scenario. So it's funny how scarcity thinking can creep up. But what I would do is be mindful of the stories that someone's telling themselves in terms of scarcity and abundance, and ask themselves, are you coming from a place of scarcity in that there might not be enough resources to do something, or money's getting tight? And I know for me, I like to rechannel that. I mean, let's say somebody truly is, they have to dip into their savings in 2 months if they don't find more sales. I use that as motivation to to do what needs to be done to serve that time in the business. But yeah, as it relates to the scarcity versus abundance thing, I think part of the trick is to slow down and to become present to the stories that we tell ourselves, and understanding what we get from those stories. And if you ask yourself, what do you get from this language? Is the answer getting you a feeling, or is it getting you a sense of empowerment that helps you to move forward? Or is the answer to what do you get from this question, or this, what do you get from this story you're telling yourself? Is that answer something that makes you feel small, or makes you feel afraid, or makes you feel like you're stuck or paralyzed? So I like to ask that question and then see if that answer serves you. And I'm not sure if that'll directly correlate to abundance or scarcity, but I think it could help someone.
What happens if you were in that second? So if somebody felt small or they're kind of out of it, how are you helping them shift out of where they're at with language and mindset?
Part of it comes with telling a different story, evolving our language to have a different story. And I say that because I've worked with people that, and I've done this myself, where I have had a story that I've told myself, and I keep telling myself the same story, and I keep getting the same results because I have the same inputs, I have the same stories. So part of it starts with, okay, well, if that's not what you want to feel, if you feel that the story you're telling yourself is one of scarcity and it's not serving you, what's a new story? What's the new story that you can start telling yourself? And that sometimes takes a question to jolt someone, if you will, out of their current state and the current storytelling. Does that answer the question a little more?
So what would somebody say as in the story? Like, what would they, I'm just trying to have a formula so people can put in.
Okay.
Because it's a very,
can you give me an example of, and I feel like both of us could probably come up with one here.
Somebody who's probably not believing in themselves and their business, and then all of a sudden they're unsure of themselves. Maybe it's they doing a sales call, maybe it's their marketing, any of those things.
Okay.
There's a constant cycle, and maybe their business plateaued. Because as every entrepreneur goes through that, like ups and downs and doubts. So how do they shift themselves out of it?
Okay. Yeah, my gut instinct is to tell a different story, but I realize we want something a little more practical here. So I would start to use language like, I am going to do this. I am going to change my marketing, talk to someone. I know for me, sometimes getting in that mode and asking for someone else's thoughts can help to get me out of the language that I'm using. So if the language I'm using is the language that I know, so let's take an example.
Here's an example. There's a constant one with people who don't like financials. They'll be like, I'm not good with numbers. So maybe they'll avoid getting their taxes done properly, or maybe they're in that situation of like, they're making money, but they still don't know their profit and their cost because they have it. Their story is, I'm not good with numbers, or.
Yes. Thank you for that. That's a good example. Makes me think of a time where I wanted to run. I wanted to go run in the mornings to mix up my mountain biking routine. And I kept saying, I'm not a runner. So I kept saying, I'm not a runner. And I would not run because I wasn't a runner. I don't run. So to your point on that, that's a slightly different in that that's someone who has a self-identity of they're not something. And as a result, they have friction when they try to do that thing, right? So if someone says, I'm not good with numbers, they know that knowing their numbers serves their company, it serves their financial health of the company. What I'd start with is to stop saying, I'm not good with numbers, because that creates a type of friction when it comes to actually working with numbers. So as it relates to changing the story in that context, I'd say to not say that someone's not good with something, and possibly even start saying, I'm good with numbers. And the more that we tell ourselves that story, the more that friction when it comes to actually working with the numbers in the company, the more that changes, because there's the friction goes away because someone realizes, oh, they're actually good with numbers. And that may sound extremely simple to just change that little narrative, but that can keep people stuck for a long time. And I know that can happen. So that's one example of that. Is there something else that you can think of? And I think if anything
So
else,
how would you use it in the formula of feel and see things, right? Because kind of telling somebody a story, how do you use it in your formula of like, okay, so they're not feeling confident, so how would they shift that to feeling confident? How would they see things differently?
okay, confidence numbers. Okay. I'd go back to the how does someone feel when they're confident? So whatever's true for that individual. And if we just take the example of someone that's calm and they're present to that, and it's kind of a reverse engineering of sorts, where if someone wants to feel calm and present with numbers and not like really nervous and I don't know, I don't understand this, they can start to change their story, aka start to say I'm good with numbers, or I'm getting better at numbers, if that resonates more. And then from that, changing the way that someone sees something, they're able to feel differently. So if someone says I'm not good with numbers, they keep saying that, then they start saying I'm good with numbers, I'm better with numbers. That can change the way that they feel over the course of time. That doesn't happen overnight, but over the course of a few weeks, just saying that self identity changing statement, if you will, can help to change the way somebody feels in that. And maybe there's more of it than that too. Sometimes if that doesn't work, finding somebody who is an expert with numbers and having them hold someone's hand for the first month or two so that they can understand, oh, this is a cash flow problem in your company and this is what's happening. And sometimes that can help someone too if there's a lot of energy or a lot of discomfort, a lot of nervousness around numbers.
Okay.
So recap. So changing the story by affirming what someone can be that can serve them in the process, and not saying that they're not something. And then if that doesn't work, finding an outside expert that does feel confident and you do feel that around them, and then having them help that transition.
Great.
Any other members or anything that you think that?
Yeah, I think that'd be great with that formula and stuff.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matthew.
Yes, grateful to share. Thank you for having me.